Yeah, I'll see you.
We're just going to jump right into the study this morning. The hymn of the day for next week is very familiar to all of us. I'm assuming, dear Christians, one and all rejoice. Dear Christians, one
The D-verse?
It is a Luther hymn, yep. You know what? Let's grab hymnals. Let's sing a stanza or two of it anyway. Come on. Never pass up an opportunity to sing Dear Christians, one and all rejoice.
I'm going this way. I'm not giving it to you. Just in case you were coming this way. I know. Just giving you a hard.
Are they all at the bottom?
There's a couple up there.
Thank you. I need one more for here, I can get them down. I think that should
Is anyone using this?
All right, hymn number 556, 556. 555 is a good one too. They're very similar in melody also. Okay, so if we sing verse 2, we can't stop at verse 2. Because in verse 2 we're singing about being bound in chains by Satan and death and sin being our torment. And then that second stanza ends with, so firmly sin possessed me. So we have to keep going. We can't just stop after verse 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to sing 1, 2, and then jump to 4. Okay, 1, 2, jump to 4, and that's it. Because this is a sermon in itself. Dear Christians, one and all rejoice, with exultation springing, and with united heart and voice, and holy rapture singing, proclaim the wonders God has done, how He is right on the victory won, what price our ransom cost Him. Fast bound in Satan's chains I lay, death brooded darkly o'er me. Sin was my torment night and day, in sin my mother bore me. But daily deeper still I fell, my life became a living hell, so firmly sin possessed me. But God had seen my wretched state before the world's foundation, and mindful of His mercies great, He planned for my salvation. He turned to me a Father's heart. He did not choose the easy part, but gave His dearest treasure. So if you want to know how it ends, you've got to come to church next Sunday. Find out what that dearest treasure is. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, you show those in error the light of your truth, so that they may return to the way of righteousness. Grant faithfulness to all who are admitted into the fellowship of Christ's church, that they may avoid whatever is contrary to their confession and follow all such things as are pleasing to you. Through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Okay, so long promised, and finally here is this sheet, which is a chronology of the kings of the divided kingdom. Okay, there is a I chopped the top section off because it was the kings of the United Kingdom, and I think those are familiar to all of us, right? Saul, David, Solomon, boom, that's it. After that, now we have this divided kingdom. So, in the left-hand column, you see Judah, it's the kingdom in the south. The right-hand column, Israel, kingdom in the north. Israel is also called what? What other name does it go by in Kings and Chronicles? Starts with an S. Samaria. Yeah, Israel is also called Samaria. Okay, so there you see there are columns in each of these in the left and right section. We've got years. So these are the dates. 931 is an agreed upon date when the kingdom split. So when Rehoboam began reigning in the north or in the south, and when Jeroboam began reigning in the north. And then there you can see there are dates on the left-hand column there for each of these kings. Then, as we make our way to the right, then we have the actual name of kings. And underneath their names, you will see that there, if it's in parentheses, if it says son, they were the son of the previous reigning king. They're the rightful successor. But it's not always a son of a king that takes the throne, right? Sometimes there's a military coup, and you have the commander of an army or a captain. Sometimes it's just worthless, wicked men that rise up and put the king to death. And so you see some of these names actually have nothing by them. Particularly, things get really bad up in the North Kingdom right before the Assyrian captivity. And then, in the middle column of each of these, you see how the kings start and how they end in terms of there being a good king or a wicked king. So, there's a lot of evil. They started bad, they ended bad. Some kings started good and ended bad. Some started bad and ended good. And then a few were good throughout. And then a very helpful column to the right. The prophets associated with a particular reign of a king. So if you look down the middle of that left-hand column, when you see Isaiah and Micah, when you see the kings that they are serving under, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and so forth. And then you also get to see which prophets were sent to the northern kingdom and which were sent to the southern kingdom. And then another helpful column, the scripture references in Kings and Chronicles for the kings and the prophets themselves. So, hang on to this as we're going, finishing our way through Kings. It's also helpful as we look through Chronicles. If you have been reading through any of Kings lately, especially through the chapters in 2 Kings that we're going to be going through today, you're going to find that things get really, really confusing with regard to names. So sometimes, for example, let's see, this is the 4th king down on the Judah side. Okay, see that king? Name is Jehoram. Well, sometimes in Kings he's actually called Joram. Joram. So you get their real names, but you also get kind of like a nickname, or maybe how they were known in kind of a familiar or even colloquial sense. And then if that weren't bad enough, you got kings in the north and south with the same name. And so you have to keep track of, you've got to be paying attention to, who's in Israel, who's in Judah. And that's the only way that you can keep them in track. So, because you get a lot of, you get a couple Jehorams, you get a couple Jehoash. And Jehoash is also known as Joash. These, nicknames, so to speak. So, but this is a helpful little sheet for y'all. And so you see, the northern kingdom falls first. We get to the 17th chapter of 2 Kings, and these last, half dozen kings that are reigning on the Israel side, I mean, it just goes from bad to worse. You got all these military coups, people are still being idolatrous. And then finally, you get some of the last kings starting to make deals with Assyria, because Assyria is now on the stage as this world power. Okay, it's like Babylon, or it's like Egypt. You know, one of these great kingdoms, and they start grabbing land from different places. And the Israelite kings tries to enter into what we call a sort of we would call a vassal treaty. Tries to make a vassal treaty, which is to say, the king of Assyria, you will be my lord, and I will be your subject, and I'll like pay you a tribute every year or every so often, so that you don't come and wipe us out, right? But you also come to our defense when we're in need, like a lord would do for his subjects. That doesn't end up going too well for Israel, because I believe it's Hoshea, the last king in Israel, who tries to do this backdoor deal with the king of Egypt. And then the king of Assyria finds out, and he comes, and that's when the northern kingdom is just obliterated, and people are carted off into captivity. The southern kingdom lasts for another 150-ish years, till about 586. And that's when the Babylonians, the next world power, come on the stage, and they cart everybody off to Babylon. Babylonian captivity. So, a helpful chart. All right, so last time we were talking a little bit about Naaman, and then Naaman not wanting to, or thinking that Elisha's instructions for washing and being cleansed of leprosy was silly. And he says, why would I wash in the Jordan? The rivers in Damascus are so far superior to this pathetic river here. And the servants end up convincing him, saying, you know what, come on. Why don't you even try it? Oh, sorry.
Any more papers?
Oh. I don't have an outline for this current section. So like from chapters, I have one from last Sunday. Is that what you're looking for? I have one for chapters 1 through 5. I didn't put one together for
this one.
6.
Yeah, maybe she might.
Sure.
I was here this week, but I
So, sorry, I don't have it. It was a test to see who really wants it, see if they're really being relied upon. Guess I'm going to have to put this on. So, I'll do my best to put one together. But I want to at least just kind of talk our way up to chapter 17 with the destruction of the northern kingdom. So Naaman. And we're really in the middle of Elisha's, mighty act as prophet. Elisha being the successor to Elijah. And so Naaman gets sent, commander of the army of Syria. Syria is a key player. Syria is going to give Israel some problems. But in this chapter, we've got this healing of leprosy. Now if you've read throughout your Bible, oftentimes you'll see someone's a leper or leprosy, and then you'll see a little footnote right there. And the footnote typically says something like, this is just a catch-all term for skin diseases. Okay? So, the person may not have actually had leprosy, but may have had some other fungus or growth or, kind of skin, I don't know, some other, skin disease. I mean, it very well could have been leprosy. Speaking of leprosy, so leprosy is curable now, right? It's a bacterial infection, and it can be cured with antibiotics. There's a great movie about Father Damien. You know about Father Damien, who went to the Hawaiian island of Molokai, which used to be a leper colony, and he went there to, as a missionary to the lepers on that colony. And he was there for years. I can't remember how many, but he eventually contracted leprosy himself. And so there's a movie called Molokai, and it's worth watching. Good movie. Okay, so Naaman, familiar story, he does finally submit to Elisha's instruction. He goes down to the Jordan 7 times, and then, whoa, restored flesh like that of a little child. He comes back to Elisha, and he wants to offer him all sorts of riches and treasure, as a payment. And Elisha says, nope. And then this is really interesting. 2 Kings 5, starting at verse 17. Right after Elisha says, no, I'm not going to receive any of your presents. Then Naaman said, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. You see how Lord is in all caps there? Right? So that's Yahweh in the Hebrew. Naaman, who's some pagan, some heathen from Syria, because of this healing, this mighty act that God did through the prophet Elisha, recognizes there is no God on earth but Yahweh. And so he wants some actual earth from, the promised land, from where God's chosen people dwell, to take back with him to Syria. In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant. And this is remarkable. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. And Elisha said to him, go in peace. Naaman knows he's got to go back to Syria, right? He's got to go back to his Lord. Now his Lord is an idolater. And he worships this false god Rimmon. And apparently maybe he's got some deformity, maybe he's old, and he leans on Naaman when he goes into this house of worship. And so Naaman says, please, I beg, don't hold it against me when I have to go back and do my duty in Syria. And he's pardoned. Elisha says to him, go in peace. Remarkable thing. He wants earth to take back so he can worship Yahweh in Syria, and pardon because, he knows that, worship is done with more than just kind of our minds, right? More than our spirits. Our bodies are engaged in worship. When we walk into a house of worship, there is a real confession that we're participating in this by our being present there. And so Naaman, it's not good enough for Naaman to think, well, I know in my mind what I believe. I know there's no such, Rimmon's not a real God. No, he knows that by being there, there's actually, this is something that the Lord is not okay with worshiping in temples of false gods. And that his presence there does convey something. And he's concerned enough that he wants pardon from the mouthpiece of God. That's what the prophets are. They are the mouthpieces of God. Right? What do the prophets typically say? The word of the Lord came to me, and then they proclaim the word. And so the word that the Lord proclaims to Naaman is, go in peace. Remarkable. So Naaman takes off. Gehazi, who's the servant of Elisha, says, boy, we sure missed out on a bunch of goods. And so he goes and he tries to figure out a way to get all of these things that Naaman wanted to give Elisha, but Elisha had refused. And so Gehazi says, hey, I'll take some of that stuff. And, I think he said, he lies to Naaman, about, Elisha doesn't want this, but there's some other guys that could really benefit from, having all this stuff. So, give it to them. I'll make sure it gets to them. And Naaman's like, all right, great. And Gehazi makes his way back, and he thinks he's pulled a fast one. But you look at verse 25 now, 2 Kings 5:25. He, that being Gehazi, he went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, where have you been, Gehazi? And he said, your servant went nowhere. But he said to him, did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments? olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants. Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. So he went out from his presence, a leper like snow. Harsh judgment upon poor Gehazi. All right. Now before we meet Jehu, we've got some remarkable deeds done by Elisha. Some of the sons of the prophets are out chopping down trees, and one of them loses an axe head. And then Elisha says, or he gets I don't know what he does, cuts off a branch from a tree, throws it in the water, and then the axe head comes floating up. It's almost like right out of a scene from, this is terrible, I shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna. It's almost like a scene from Monty Python. Anybody seen Monty Python, The Search for the Holy Grail? Where they're talking about whether or not they're going to burn this witch, right? And they're like, well, how can we tell if she's a witch? Well, if she floats, or if she weighs more than a duck, or something like that. It's just some, crazy thing. And so Elijah, one of the sons of the prophets loses this axe head, and he's afraid to tell Elisha, but it's like, hey, what happened? Oh, I lost the axe head. Oh, just okay, throw a stick in the water, comes floating to the top. So they get the axe head back. And then, after that, there's a time when the king of Syria starts waging war against Israel. And he's trying to... what's happening? Chapter 6, starting in verse 8. Once when the king of Syria was warring against Israel, he took counsel with his servants, saying, at such and such a place shall be my camp. But the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are going down there. So, you have a question? Are you sure? Okay. So Elisha is warning the king so that he doesn't fall into the hands of the Syrians. Right? So the king of Syria is now troubled by this, and he wants to know, hey, who's leaking information? Right? In verse 12, and one of his servants said, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha. It's always those prophets, right? They're just thorns in the flesh of these wicked kings. I love I forget where it was, but the beginning of 2 Kings, but they want to go, I can't remember if it was Ahab or if it was after Ahab died at the start of 2 Kings, but there's this incident where one of the kings is going to, he wants word from the prophets of Baal, and Elisha or Elijah cut him off and say, hey, you know what? Go send this message back to the king. The messengers go back, and the king goes, hey, hey, what happened? What are the prophets of Baal? Well, we ran into this man of God. What did he look like? Well, he wore camel's hair, and he had a belt. Oh, it's Elisha. The kings know. Oh man, it's that prophet, right? The one who always has terrible things to say. He's always telling me to stop worshiping at the high places and so forth. So, now the servants of Syria. Verse 12, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. So, Elisha gets this information, not because anybody in the king's court is leaking, but because he's getting this like special revelation from God, what the king is speaking in private. And this, of course, doesn't make the king of Syria happy at all. And so they go to seize Elijah. And there's this wonderful, wonderful passage here. Starting in verse 15. When the servant of the man of God, so we have basically Gehazi's replacement, the servant of Elijah. When the servant of the man of God rose early in the morning and went out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city. And the servant said, alas, my master, what shall we do? He said, do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Ah, I love that line. Love that verse. It's so good. even though the servant doesn't know what Elisha's talking about. What do you mean, those who are with us are more than who are with them? 17. Then Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So this young man gets to see, the Lord opens his eyes, and he gets to see basically this, spiritual realm, I guess we could put it. He sees the hosts, or the armies of the Lord, getting ready to fight. Elisha prays again that God would blind the Syrians. They're blinded. And then Elisha says, goes to them in their blindness, and he goes, oh, the man that you're seeking isn't here. He's actually over this other place. And so the whole Syrian army is like, oh, okay, let's follow this guy to where the man of God is. And Elisha leads them right into Samaria. Okay? Right into the kingdom, the capital of the northern kingdom. And you think, as you're reading through this, that Elisha is going to say, all right, soldiers, put the army to death. And that's what some of the people think when they're in Samaria. Oh, should we put them to death? And Elisha says, what? That's not the way we treat prisoners of war. That's not the way that we treat people we take captive. We don't put them to death. And so what they end up doing is they end up giving them food and water and then sending them home on their way, treating them graciously. Unfortunately, it's not the end of Syria's rage against Israel. And so then you have this great siege of Syria against Samaria, the northern kingdom, and things get really, really bad in Samaria. And this is where you encounter some just horrible stories about two women. Two women call out to the king one day. Let's pick it up in verse 25. And there was a great famine in Samaria as they besieged it, that's Syria, until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and the fourth part of a cab of dove's dung for 5 shekels of silver. So, that's lost on all of us, but the point we're supposed to get is that things that are normally at a certain price are now being, sold for an exorbitant amount of money. So maybe you were able to pick up a donkey's head on the cheap before, but now it's going to cost you 80 shekels of silver. What you would use dove's dung for, I'm not exactly sure, but it's going to cost you 5 shekels of silver now. 26, as the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, Help, my lord, O king. And he said, If the Lord will not help you, how shall I help you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress? The king asked her, What is your trouble? She answered, This woman said to me, Give your son, that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow. So we boiled my son and ate him. And on the next day I said to her, Give your son, that we may eat him. But she has hidden her son. So, it cannot get any worse than this. This is as bad as it gets. This is worse than things should ever get. And when the king hears the words, he tore his clothes, and he says in verse 31, May God do so to me and more also if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today. So the king says, Elisha, you're the one to blame for this, right? You're the one to blame. Why would the king blame Elisha for this? Why would the king hold Elisha responsible for this famine? How is Elisha perhaps responsible for the siege? Well, I think it's because the king... sorry?
said I knew this, I can't remember.
Oh, no,
I said you're talking to myself.
no. I think it has to do with the fact that because they had let the armies go previously, right? There was this, we had them. They were right here. And you, Elisha, said that we should give them food and water and set them on their way. We did nothing but we poked the bear, right? We just woke the sleeping giant, and now here they are. And look how bad it is. And so the king sends a messenger down to lop the head off of Elijah. That's not going to happen. And then verse 7, as you can see, the heading in your Bible probably says Elisha promises food. Elisha says, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord. Tomorrow, about this time, a seah of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. So, obviously, things are going to get better economically. Things are going to return to normal. And then the captain, on whose hand the king leaned, this is the captain that the king sent to take the head of Elijah. He said to the man of God, that is Elisha, if the Lord himself should make windows in heaven, would this thing be? Which is a statement of total disbelief and doubt. Okay? I know it's kind of a tricky thing to understand, but the response from Elisha is, you shall see with your own eyes, but you shall not eat of it. So the Lord's going to keep you alive so you can see that things are going to improve, but there's a price to pay for your disbelief. And so, the Syrians all camped out around Samaria, laying siege to this. The way the story goes, there are these 4 lepers who are outside the city. And they say to themselves, hey, you know what? Let's not just sit around here and die, right? Let's go see if perhaps the Syrians may give us something to eat, or may, show us some mercy. And so as they rose at twilight and they went to the camp of the Syrians, they found that the camp of the Syrians was deserted. And it wasn't just that everybody packed up and left. They deserted in haste and left everything behind. They ran for their lives. And as we read through this chapter, what we come to find out is that the Lord, what the Syrians hear, is the sound of an enormous army coming their way. Just this great rumble of the earth. And the king of Syria and his counselors say, you know what? The king of Samaria, he's contracted the Hittites and the Egyptians. He's got some heavy hitters on his side, and they're going to wipe us out. And so they just abandon everything and get out of there. So these 4 lepers come into the camp and they go, wow, look at all this stuff. There's food. And so they just start throwing a little party. And they're immediately convicted, and they go, you know what? This is too good of news to keep to ourselves. We need to go report this back in Samaria. So they go and they send word. And the people in Samaria and the king, they're hesitant to receive it. And they go, okay, well, let's dispatch a little party to go check out this camp to see if these lepers are actually telling the truth. And sure enough, they find the camp deserted. And as they are going outside of the camp, they're finding that there is just belongings of the Syrians littered on the way. So as they're making their escape, they're just like tossing anything that would hinder them from a fast escape, just leaving it all behind. And so the Samaritans, people that live in the kingdom of Samaria, are able to plunder the entirety of the Syrian army and get all the goods, all the provisions in the camp, without having to lift a sword, or without having to swing a sword or throw a spear. And so all of this provision then comes back into Samaria. And what happens to that poor captain who disbelieved the word of the Lord from Elisha? Well, he gets trampled in the gate. And so the word of the Lord comes to pass, that this seahs of flour will be sold or be sold inexpensively, but you won't eat any of them. So that takes care of Syria for the time being. In chapter 8, we have The Shunammite's land is restored. If you remember the widow, she wasn't a widow. The Shunammite was this lady who built an addition to her house to help or to give Elisha a place to stay on his travels. And during one of his stays, he says, hey, well, what can I do for you? And, I don't know. And he goes, well, you know what? This time next year, you'll have a kid. And she's like, whatever. My husband's old. And the Lord says, anyways, she ends up bearing a son. But as the child grows, he gets sick at one point and dies. And then Elisha, in similar fashion to Elijah before him, performs a resurrection. Well, this Shunammite woman falls on hard times during the siege when Syria was out there. And so she is... where's the word I'm looking for? She had gone to the land of the Philistines for 7 years. Chapter 8, verse 3. And at the end of the 7 years, when the woman returned from the land of the Philistines, she went to appeal to the king for her house and her land. Now the king was talking with Gehazi. Oh, we get to meet Gehazi again. So Gehazi had left Elijah's company, remember? We don't have word that, of his suffering from this leprosy, but now he's, giving report to the king. And Gehazi he's relaying the mighty deeds of Elisha. And he starts talking about Elisha raising this Shunammite woman's son from the dead. And lo and behold, who comes into the king's presence but this very Shunammite woman? And Gehazi said, my lord, O king, here's the woman, and here is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. And so then the king restored to her all that was hers, her land, her fields, and her house. Now then, after that, there's a new king that's put on the throne in Syria. And here is an example of the difficulty with the names. Chapter 8, verse 16. You see the title of that section? Jehoram reigns in Judah. And then you read the verse that says, in the 5th year of Joram. Okay, so that's the same person. Jehoram and Joram. And this is, you just kind of have to keep this straight as you're reading through, because you've got nicknames or shortened names or contracted names being used. So here, this is a great one. In the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, when Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. Right? Follow that? So how many Jehorams do we have? We got a Jehoram in the north and a Jehoram in the south. Okay? It's just one of those names. It was like Jeffrey in 1976. Everybody was named their kid. Yep. All right. So, we got these information about a couple of kings in the north and the south, and then there's renewed battling against Syria. And that brings us to chapter 9. And this is where we meet Jehu. Now, Jehu is the Lord uses Jehu to really clean house and bring some judgment down on these houses that have gone astray. It's slaughter. It's absolute slaughter. Elisha sends one of the sons of the prophets to Israel, to a place where the king's commanders are gathering and counseling one another. And he sends him to go and anoint Jehu, who's one of these commanders, as king of Israel. And as king of Israel, he's going to start cracking some skulls in a very real way. So, let's see, where do we want to pick up? Yeah, let's start up at verse 14, 9:14. Basically, this young man, the son of the prophet, he goes up there and he finds all these commanders in council together, walks in, and they go, "What do you want?" And he goes, "I want to talk to Jehu." And they go into a side room, he pours a flask of oil on Jehu's head, and he goes, "The word of the Lord is that you're now the king of Israel, and you are supposed to, you got to wipe out all of Ahab and Jezebel, that whole house. It's got to be totally decimated." Jehu comes out, the commanders go, "Hey, what do you want?" "Nothing, you know those crazy prophets are." "No, really, tell us." "Okay, I'm the king." And then they all say, "Jehu's king." And that takes us to verse 14. "Thus Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram, with all Israel, had been on guard at Ramoth Gilead against Hazael, king of Syria. But King Joram had returned to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds that the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. So Jehu said, 'If this is your decision, then let no one slip out of the city to go and tell the news in Jezreel.' Then Jehu mounted his chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, had come down to visit Joram." So, Joram had been wounded in battle against the Syrians, and that king from Judah had come down to visit Joram in his convalescence. So we've got the kings of the north and the south together now. And Jehu knows this, and Jehu is going to take advantage of it. Verse 17, "Now the watchman was standing on the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came, and he said, 'I see a company.' Joram said, 'Take a horseman and send it to meet them, and let him say, "Is it peace?" So a man on horseback went to meet him and said, "Thus says the king, is it peace?" And Jehu said, "What do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me." And the watchman reported, saying, "The messenger reached them, but he is not coming back." Then he sent out a second horseman, who came to them and said, "Thus the king has said, is it peace?" But Jehu answered, "What do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me." Again the watchman reported, "He reached them, but he is not coming back." And now that he's getting closer, he's noticing something about this company approaching Jezreel. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. So we got Storm and Norman, basically, in Jehu. Right? So, just a fierce warrior, driving these chariots. So Joram knows, okay, things are going to get bad. Make ready. And they ready his chariot. Then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, set out, each in his chariot, and went to meet Jehu, and met him at the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. Okay, so now this is, we've got to pay attention, okay? Little alarm bells going off here with Naboth the Jezreelite, or the property of Naboth the Jezreelite. When Joram saw Jehu, he said, "Is it peace, Jehu?" He answered, "What peace can there be, so long as the whorings and the sorceries of your mother Jezebel are so many?" Then Joram reined about and fled, saying to Ahaziah, "Treachery, O Ahaziah!" And Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and shot Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart, and he sank in his chariot. Jehu said to Bidkar, his aide, "Take him up and throw him on the plot of ground belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember, when you and I rode side by side behind Ahab, his father, how the Lord made this pronouncement against him. As surely as I saw yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declares the Lord, I will repay you on this plot of ground. Now therefore take him up and throw him on the plot of ground in accordance with the word of the Lord." What's he talking about? What happened before with Naboth? Yeah, you love this story, don't you? You should write a song about it. I told you before there was a band that was popular in Southern California when I was in the early 90s. It was called Drive Like Jehu. Because Jehu drives furiously. Drive Like Jehu. I'll spare you the music. Naboth owned a vineyard way back in 1 Kings. And Ahab wanted the vineyard, but Naboth wouldn't sell to him. And so Ahab went back home. Jezebel said, "Hey, why the long face?" And he said, "Oh, I wanted that vineyard, but Naboth won't sell it to me." And she goes, "Aren't you the king of Israel? Can't you do whatever you want?" And so they orchestrate the plan to put to death Naboth and his sons. They concoct this, and they scheme to steal this vineyard from Naboth. And here we are, all these years later. Things are coming full circle, and Ahab's son is being put to death on the very property of Naboth that his father had stolen. And that's what Jehu is talking about when he's talking to Bidkar and Zaid, because beforehand they had been in the service of King Ahab. 27, when Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, okay, so the king of the north is dead, right? Arrow in the back, pierced his heart, slumped over in his chariot. He's now scattered in the ground of Naboth. King of Israel's gone. Now we got the king of Judah, Ahaziah, okay? When he saw it, he fled in the direction of Beth Hagan. And Jehu pursued him and said, "Shoot him also." And they shot him in the chariot at the ascent of Gur, which is by Ibleam. And he fled to Megiddo and died there. His servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem and buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, Ahaziah began to reign over Judah. Okay. And then we get to the final. The queen mother herself. When Jehu came to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out of the window. Why would she do that? So she gets all dolled up, right? Gets her makeup on, puts her hair up, wears some fancy duds, and presents herself in the window. I don't know, any guesses?
He wants to seduce her.
Okay, maybe she wants to seduce him. I don't know.
Oh, that's a guess.
No.
She making fun of him by trying to be a target.
No. I don't think so. I mean, she could be trying to seduce him, but she doesn't. Jehu seems to be he's a one-track mind guy, right? He's just like, all that he's thinking is, right, death in the name of the Lord. You get in my way. I mean, he's executing judgment on the house of Ahab and Jezebel. So she's got to know it's curtains. So maybe this is her last way of kind of, buffing herself up, right? She wants to look nice when she dies, right? Well, sorry, Jezebel, it's not going to happen. Maybe she's trying to inspire her subjects by the pomp. I'm the queen, you all need to come to my defense or something. I don't know. At any rate, so she paints her eyes and adorns her head and looked out of the window. You get the picture of the evil queen from some of the Disney stories, right? Like Sleeping Beauty or something. As Jehu entered the gate, she said, "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" And he lifted up his face to the window and said, "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. She's just a gross lady, surrounding herself, with these weird, pagan religious folks, these eunuchs. So 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. He said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down. And some of her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled on her. Then he went in and ate and drank. And he said, "See now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. Well, when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. When they came back and told him, he said, "This is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite. In the territory of Jezreel the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the field in the territory of Jezreel, so that no one can say, 'This is Jezebel.'" So Ahab's son, the king of Judah, and Jezebel have been taken care of, but that is just the beginning. So now Jehu is going to go and slaughter the descendants. And I think there's 70 of them in chapter 10. And he's going to collect their heads in these baskets. I mean, it's just an absolute bloodbath with Jehu. And then after that, he's going to go down and he's going to strike the prophets of Baal. And he's going to be real kind of manipulative. Or he's going to concoct the story. He's going to come in and say, it's time. I'm a devout Baal worshiper. Like, let's get everybody that wants to worship Baal, and let's get them all in the temple, really, so that he can put them all to death. And so Jehu, if we go down to the end of chapter 10, we've got all these servants of Baal in the house of Baal. Verse 24, chapter 10, 24, "Then they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed 80 men outside and said, 'The man who allows any of those whom I give into your hands to escape shall forfeit his life.'" All right, so I mean, high stakes if you're in the army of Jehu. Okay, you don't let anybody go by. So as soon as he made an end of offering the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guards and to the officers, "Go in and strike them down. Let not a man escape." So when they put them to the sword, the guard and the officers cast them out and went into the inner room of the house of Baal. And they brought out the pillar that was in the house of Baal and burned it. And they demolished the pillar of Baal and demolished the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. So I think there it is, the very next verse. "Thus Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel." Okay? No small feat to wipe out Baal. But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. That is, we've talked about this for several weeks. What is the sin of Jeroboam? It's right here. The golden calves that were in Bethel and Dan. That's the sin of Jeroboam. And that's the one that some of these kings who are faithful and who listen to the prophets, they get so close to being totally faithful to the word of the Lord, but they fail to remove these golden calves. And so the Lord said to Jehu, "Because you have done well in carrying out what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the 4th generation shall sit on the throne of Israel." But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin. So, we are going to, I'm going to let you read the next few chapters on your own. We basically have, it's a series of kings. We do have the death of Elijah in chapter 13. He doesn't get to go up in a whirlwind into heaven with chariots of fire like Elijah does, but he actually dies there, and he gets buried. And then there's this odd, happening that as in the place where Elisha is buried, there's another. Anyways, somebody happens to fall into the very tomb, grave of where Elisha's bones are, and the dead man falls in, touches the bones of Elisha, and then boom, comes back to life. So there's this. I love these stories because we tend to divorce a lot of, or we tend to minimize, denigrate even the physical, material things. And they're so useful and important in the Old Testament. What people do with their worship and their adoration in their body. Right? Naaman wants to take dirt. He wants some actual material to take with him back to Syria. And, even in our Lord's ministry, when Jesus is on his way to go heal Jairus' daughter, right, he comes into contact with the woman with the flow of blood for 12 years. And there's a whole crowd around Jesus, and she just gets to, touch the hem of his garment. And he goes, whoa, some power just left me, right? Somebody touched me. And Peter's like, are you kidding? This is like Times Square here. Like everybody's all smashed together like sardines. And he's like, no, somebody touched me. And so, and this happens even with Peter and Paul. You got people wanting to fall into the shadow of the apostles in order to be healed. Anyways. So the bones of Elisha are even used to bring this man back to life. All right. We end up with the fall of the northern kingdom in chapter 17. And there's an important part that we need to take a look at here. So, I think I had told you that Hosea, he's the last name there on your right-hand side, Hosea, he's trying to work both sides, right? He wants to be faithful, or he wants to be at peace with Assyria. Hey, everybody, come on. But he also was trying to get Egypt to come in, and maybe together they can stop Assyria, and that goes badly. And so, chapter 17, picking up at verse 6, in the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria. He carried the Israelites away to Assyria and placed them in Halah, and on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the city of the Medes. And this occurred. This is important. This is a section that you should mark in your Bibles, okay? Because this provides you. This is the why for Assyria and the destruction of Israel. This occurred because the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had feared other gods and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel, and in the customs that the kings of Israel had practiced. We didn't read it, but there's one of the last kings in the northern kingdom even offers his own son as a burnt offering. It's just gross wickedness, gross idolatry. Had the Lord warned them prior to coming into the promised land? If you do not scour this land, it will infect you. It will. It will pollute you and your religion, and it will pollute your children. Verse 9, and the people of Israel did secretly against the Lord their God things that were not right. They built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set up for themselves pillars and asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. And there they made offerings on all the high places, as the nations did, whom the Lord carried away before them. And they did wicked things, provoking the Lord to anger, and they served idols, of which the Lord had said to them, you shall not do this. Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah by every prophet and every seer, saying, turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments and my statutes, in accordance with all the law that I commanded your fathers, and that I sent to you by my servants, the prophets. But they would not listen, but were stubborn, as their fathers had been, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They despised his statutes and his covenant that he made with their fathers, and the warnings that he gave them. They went after false idols and became false. And that is worthy of marking, highlighting, underlining. They went after false idols and became false. And they followed the nations that were around them, concerning whom the Lord had commanded them that they should not do like them. And they abandoned all the commandments of the Lord their God and made for themselves metal images of 2 calves. The sin of Jeroboam coming again. And they made an Asherah and worshipped all the host of heaven and served Baal. And they burned their sons and their daughters as offerings and used divination and omens and sold themselves to do evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only. Judah also did not keep the commandments of the Lord their God, but walked in the customs that Israel had introduced. And the Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel and afflicted them and gave them into the hand of plunderers until he cast them out of his sight. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, king. Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit great sin. You see how often this sin of Jeroboam gets mentioned. You see how seriously, when the Lord says, "You shall have no other gods before me," he means it. And I think I had said this before a few weeks ago. You know, what's kind of a take-home message from Kings is that the Lord is faithful to his word. What he says, what he speaks, he means. He says, don't do this. There's going to be dire consequences if you do this. And he's not kidding around. God has established his own order and his own pattern of worship. He chose Jerusalem as a place where his name would be. Okay? That was the location of worship. That was the location where God would bless his people, where the male Jews were required to go and sacrifice 3 times a year for the 3 major festivals. What Jeroboam does is says, no, you don't have to do that. These 2 locations, one in Bethel, one in Dan, they're just as good as Jerusalem. And I've said this before, this even comes up later on in John chapter 4 when Jesus talks with the Samaritan woman at the well. And even then, so many years later, they're talking about the location of where true worship takes place. You Jews say this mountain. We Samaritans say this other mountain. You see the sin of Jeroboam still having effect so many years later. Anyways, we'll finish here with the Rev 21 through 23. When he had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king, and Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit great sin. The people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did. They did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel out of his sight, as he had spoken by all his servants, the prophets. So Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. Read the rest of chapter 17 on your own. There's a lot of great language in there about the fear of the Lord. Okay? And the fear of the Lord not being just kind of an emotional thing or a mental thing or a psychological thing that people have. But the fear of the Lord is actually connected with worship. You know, they regard how you behave, like offering, a burnt offering in one place, that's described as the fear of that God. So if you were in Jerusalem and you're offering a burnt offering, a sin offering, or so forth, that's you walking in the fear of the Lord. If you do that to Baal, it's you walking in the fear of Baal. So read the rest of chapter 17, and that brings us to the end of the Northern Kingdom. And unfortunately, with our remaining chapters in 2 Kings, we're about to come to the end of the Southern Kingdom too. Babylonian captivity. But then we meet some interesting folks, right? Daniel gets carted off. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. King Nebuchadnezzar. Sennacherib. It's good. A lot of good stuff. Daniel in the lion's den, all these great stories. So, okay, that's enough for today. Pray with me. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Happy Mother's Day, all you moms.